This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
You are what you watch. Hello, my name's Harry Tambuatko. Welcome to this program. Last night, or late last week, one of our hosts came up with a show, and it happens to be attorney Alan Pagia, who singularly goes in front of the TV and gives a spiel for over an hour. The interesting part of his show yesterday was he kept pointing out the issue wherein who is really responsible to the country. Now, he emphasized it's not necessarily the peace panel, it's not necessarily just the generals who can do anything. It's not the legislative, not even the judiciary, and not necessarily the president. So I was sitting there, okay, I'm figuring out it's got to be, the answer has got to be the people, the government responsible to the people. But then again, he goes forward, he goes further instead, and he says, the people of the Philippines don't seem to have any control over this country, over their government and whatnot. And he gives a point and says that when we were kids, I guess I would be involved about the same age, which is true. When I was in grade school, high school, we were never taught anything over Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. That was the totality of the Philippines. And yet, the Sultan of Sulu has been getting rent since the early 1900s for Sabah. Shouldn't it be Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, and Sabah, where close to 70% of the people who live in Sabah are basically Filipinos, regardless of faith? Now, the point is, if they're paying rent, why is it our government, since the birth of the Republic, why is it we never went after Sabah? So much so, even in the education system, we were taught to forget Sabah. Now, who would have done this? The Americans, the Europeans? If I'm not mistaken, the presence of the Americans, first we took them out 25 years ago when Subic was pushed out, but not because we took them out, they really wanted to leave anyway, and that was after Pinatubo. Then again, the problem with the Chinese has only cropped up in the last 10 years. So maybe the Americans do have some interest. It's called the Visiting Forces Agreement. And because geographically, Mindanao, especially General Santos with the bay that the deep bay that allows all the big ships to come in, the response time towards any conflict in the area could really choke China. I can understand why America would be interested. But that's only in the last 10 years. We're talking the last 50, 60, 70 years. And when it comes to the Muslims, the Bangsamoro, Mo AD and whatnot, we have the Malaysians meddling, but that's only come in the last 20, 30 years. Who exactly has been running the country? I was intrigued. So in this show, I thought we'd make the topic foreign interests and discuss what interest do other people, other nations, other countries have in the Philippines? Is it mining? Is it us, the people, the services? There's 50 million of us, now 100 plus million. Is it our great weather? What is it? Our position, geographic position? Is that the reason why many other countries, if that's even true? Ladies and gentlemen, we have Rommel Sangalang from Sugi Finance. The reason I asked him to sit with us today is because he's well, he's born Filipino, but raised in America. So basically, Americano ito. But, of course, he loves the Philippines. He's relocated back here. And he has quite a bigger view of how America has its interest in the Philippines. Then we have my associate in CB Brands, the chairman, Carl MacLean, who's basically British. But interestingly enough, he's lived in Hong Kong and overseas for the last 30, 40 years. Nevertheless, still a Brit, still a European. Gentlemen, thank you for being in the show.
Thank you.
I hope you got the gist of that. You're wondering what exactly are we, and you don't necessarily want to go deep into politics. I mean, not on TV anyway, right? Because of the status. But what exactly, first let's start with America. Is there an interest in the Philippines? Because the underlying tone that Alan Pagia said of his show yesterday was that he didn't say it outright that it's the Americans, but it should have been the Americans. Who else would there been? I mean, it's not the Brits. The Brits came, invaded the Philippines, came in, but left. Yes. And you're saying because of malaria, and brought Indians with them and left them here.
Correct.
They brought the Indians here, came, took over the Philippines, but they weren't interested in colonizing. They went to Malaysia and Singapore instead.
Yes.
The Dutch were in Indonesia. You can see it. And Taiwan. And I don't understand. The Americans, sure, they came in. They stayed for a couple of decades. But they did let go, and they left us be. They didn't make us the 51st state, or the 50th state, because there was no Hawaii then, and left it to us. But we never really had a referendum to say yes or no to become an American state. Do you think America has real interest in the Philippines? That's the first point of discussion. What is it, if they do have interest, that they would like in this country? Rommel?
Economically, I know that they do have interest in the Philippines, but also economically, it's one reason they let the Philippines go. Of course, everything from Vietnam to North Korea was a failure, and it really bankrupted what we had as far as surpluses. Mm-hmm. The American voting public votes with their pocketbook. And as much as we wanted to have more influence here in Asia, it was just unaffordable to do so. Now, with that in mind, and us leaving the bases, of course, also saved us a ton of cash. Puerto Rico we keep because they're close to us and it's okay, yes. But the Philippines is very far away, influence-wise. Now, with that in mind, what other country could an American conglomerate like GE or Chase can actually go to and train outside of India for their corporate advances? Now, India is not a bad place to go, but I'll tell you right now, if you took a survey of American people, and when people call for their service, 800 number, right, fix my problem, if they have an Indian on the phone, they are more likely hang up. Filipino goes on the phone, they're likely to stay. And when you train a Filipino correctly with the English they already know, there's a lot of consistency that the American economic people want.
But this has only been in the last 10 years, Rommel.
Yes.
Yeah, let's go back 60 years. What is it America would want with the Philippines? I mean, for example, to get involved with Malaysia, pushing out Sabah, American interests playing on the ground here in the country. What for?
America wanted to be near China, Korea, and Japan.
But was China always a threat, even the last 60 years?
Yes, because of communism, because it was once owned by 4 states, it was owned by the UK, France, Germany, Russia, the Shanghai area, which is where the money was, right? So in 1949, I think it was, when China became communist and stayed communist. So the America would definitely have wanted an interest to be close enough there to make sure that the influence would not spread. The British, when communism spread to Malaysia, they put their special forces on the ground and wiped out communism in Malaysia, because that was happening in the 60s, right?
And Singapore.
And Singapore too. So the British did their little part down there. The Americans' job was they went to Korea, as you know. Failed miserably, but they went there, and they still got South Korea, or still got a lot of influence in South Korea.
Yeah, we just slashed his face, one of the ambassadors.
That's it.
But go ahead.
So that was really my view of why America would want to be here. Now, from a Filipino standpoint, why would we want the Americans to be here? Same thing as Lee Kuan Yew said in Singapore. When the American Navy is here, when the American Air Force is here, I do not need to spend billions and billions of dollars in aircraft, in sophisticated fleets. So my view would be, providing you manage it correctly, having the Americans here with an Air Force and a Navy, which you had before, until they left, is not a bad idea. We do not have the money in the Philippines yet to spend money on armed forces. And we would never stand a chance against the Chinese anyway. So my view is if the Americans did come here or had an interest here, they could help defend this country if you played it right, at no cost to the Philippines. Same thing as Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore.
But so you're saying America has interest in this country simply because of China.
Yes.
And that interest is because they've always seen China to be a threat, not
Yes.
only in their prosperity in the last 20 years, because
Right.
40 years ago, there was nothing to talk about when it comes to China.
Right.
Literally nothing.
Correct.
And the whole of Southeast Asia was going independent. The British let go of Malaysia, it let go even of Hong Kong. Of course, Singapore went on its own. Why would America want the Philippines? Other than so America saw 6 decades ahead that one day China is going to be a problem.
I think even in 1949 they could see that China was going to be a problem. So they had to stay close to China, because communism is really the arch enemy of America. So if you have if you got 1 billion people who don't see eye to eye with your way of thinking, you have to remain close. Keep your enemies closer than your friends. That's what they would say, right?
Ramo.
Well, there was a incorrect policy that thought that the Asian domino effect actually existed. We know that that really doesn't exist, right? Where they thought when one small country after another fell, it would always fall into communism. But that's not really true. Even Vietnam, as it is today, isn't a true communist type
No, it's
country,
not.
right? And so this was thought 6 decades ago. This was the reality. It was perceived reality, and of course, it was wrong. What the Chinese and all these other communist countries actually like is the pocketbook. So unlike Russia, they wanted to balance. But here's the interesting thing about China. The Chinese, even though they're economic powerhouses today, actually don't draw and withdraw their money towards military. So when you see a country that's continuously growing a military and they actually don't need it, this growth, it becomes a problem, because now you're thinking to yourself, what are you growing this military for? To just sit there? Absolutely not. And so the Americans are afraid, once again, that this military has a purpose. We just don't know what it is.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to take a short break. There you go. You see the interests are playing in, but you see we have to begin to look back 60 years, 70 years. Because it's true. While it's true, the Filipino people as a whole should be the main rulers of the country, not necessarily the president, because they're all temporal. We vote them in and sue them after they get out of power. That's literally what we do. But while they're there, they should not have absolute control over our future, much less give property away like we're doing with Saba and soon the Bangsamoro, very obviously. But it seems there are other powers that are controlling Pinoy as if he is the puppet. Obviously, it is not necessarily the people he's appointed around him, or which is perceived to be the cabinet. Obviously, a stronger power. Again, this goes back and points fingers to 1, the EDCA, 2, Visiting Forces Agreement, 3, nuclear power and armaments which are on every ship almost when the Americans come in and out. So then you've got trade, the strength, the influence of the European Union. Then you've got Malaysia. You've got the Muslims. It's not even a problem anymore. The communists are no longer an issue. It's the Muslims. But they're only 5–6% of the total population. Anyway, stay with us. When we come back, we'll try to analyze this a little bit further.